legislation to protect a democratic world. And this is a quote. So it's them who are fighting for a democratic world. Such appeals have not worked in Westerners for a long time. Their resources are far from unlimited, and they are in no hurry to empty their arsenals. Therefore, no decisions on new trenches were made, and they limited themselves to summarizing the results of the group's work over a 2-year period and reported on the assistance to Ukraine, which has already been provided or will be provided in the near future. Although even this assistance, compared to that of 2022 to 2023, has negative dynamics and may soon run out. This is what the United States and Europe are already openly talking about. So yet another time we let down those who were helped at the first place. And even the United States Department of State was forced to draw attention to this in its annual report on human rights violation. Surprisingly, its publication coincided with the arrest on April 23rd of Ukrainian Agrarian Policy and Food Minister Solsky. He's suspected of fraud with state land worth more than $7 million. However, despite resonance, high-profile corruption cases in Ukraine rarely go to trial and rarely end up with prison sentences.
According to the Crimean media, in 2022 to 23, only 435 people, which is only 9% of those prosecuted for corruption, went to jail. The rest, believe it or not, laughable, they were just fined. Uncontrolled Western financial military aid to the Kiev regime only contributes to its growing corruption, although it seems there has been a ceiling reached at some point with multiple cases in point. On the 26th of April, during National Tele-Marathon, the Ukrainian political and economic expert Georgy Berkadze misspoke when he said that the authorities had stolen 37 billion hryvnias, approximately $1 billion, during the construction of fortifications. Then he hastened to correct his mistake, but the Freudian slip was characteristic. According to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, more than $250 million of budget funds have not passed internal audits, and a third of the humanitarian aid delivered since the beginning of 2023 has not reached military units of Ukraine. There is no doubt that these figures are underestimated by several times. Those in the Bankova have a masterful way of utilizing the money coming from the Western sponsors. Not much goes past their pockets, as we know. We are sure that the new defense and aid packages from the United States, Great Britain, the UK, Germany and other countries will suffer the same fate. Everything will be stolen in the same fashion. These facts and later facts once again confirm the urgency of the tasks of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, to eliminate threats emanating from its territory. As has been mentioned by the Russian leadership on multiple occasions, all of them will certainly be accomplished. With reference to horrific statements made by the West, self-explanatory yesterday, Western media outlets demonstrated yet again their nature. The anti-freedom, anti-democracy. On the 2nd of May, former Prime Minister, the current Foreign Minister of the UK, David Cameron, in his interview to Reuters, suddenly said that Ukraine has the right, as he put it, to strike inside Russia using British weapons. This caused an incredible media buzz, including in British media, because it is the first time that a Western politician admitted in such a candid way something that has been obvious to the absolute majority of the global majority. The West is pursuing an overt war on Russia using the Ukrainians, but it became so self-exposing, it became so self-evident that 2 hours after this publication, seemingly faced by the pressure of Downing Street, the Reuters deleted this publication, saying that a Reuters story saying Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron promises aid to Ukraine is withdrawn pending review of certain details in the story. A revised version of the story will be published in due course. End of quote. This fact of open censorship equilibrism did not go unnoticed. Even those who wanted to stand aside and keep silence had to step up against this. Less than half a day passed before Reuters returned this same publication without any noticeable changes, including the quotation given by David Cameron mentioning attacks on Russian territory, which means these were the actual words of David Cameron, and the effect was beyond all expectations. There was pressure on Reuters, and similarly not enough pressure was put on them because the publication was restored. By way of reminder, similar bravados and similar celebrations were expressed by officials of NATO countries due to the act of terrorism on the Crimean breach in October 2022. We remember spiteful social media publications and websites that applauded the excellent work of the horrific security service of Ukraine. On the next day after the act of terrorism, in the same fashion, the publications were deleted, while the collective West sought to disclaim any connections and to shift the blame. To give you several cases in point, the head of the foreign intelligence of the UK, Richard Mood, said that he is flattered by accusations of London's involvement in the Crimean breach act of terrorism. It was flattering, I quote him. It was flattering. President Putin felt MI6 was behind this. It is less intriguing, however. The UK has been very clear that it would support Ukraine to defend itself, and that's what we were doing. End of quote. Philip Breedlove, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, suggested that the armed forces of Ukraine draw their attention to the Crimean breach in order to weaken Russia. According to former commander of the alliance, Kiev could deal a blow on the Crimean breach using Harpoon anti-ship missiles supplied by the United States to Ukraine. According to Breedlove, the attack of Ukraine on the Crimean breach, according to him, believe it or not, was totally justified. Foreign Minister of Estonia, Urmas Reinsalu, welcomed an explosion on the Crimean breach and congratulated the armed forces of Ukraine on this. And I quote the head of the Foreign Ministry of Estonia. Estonia, this is what he said, naturally welcomes and congratulates the Ukrainian special services that are probably behind this operation. The positive thing is that the movement stopped, according to Reinsalu. The head of military intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Kirill Budanov, admitted the breach is well defended, but everyone is working on this problem. The permanent representative of Ukraine to UN, Sergei Kislits, hinted at potential pending attack of Kiev on the Crimean breach, publishing in X social media image with 6 major types of bridges in 2024 with an empty image next to the Kerch bridge. Deputy of the Polish Sejm of the left party, Robert Biedroń, called an attack on the bridge, and I quote him, a bomb to his heart. His colleague from the Right and Justice party, Miroslava Stachowiak-Różecka, indicated that this event is not only symbolical in nature but also practical. Moving on to the head of the MFA of Latvia, Baiba Braži, what she said was Ukraine is allegedly entitled to attack Russian facilities, whereas Western countries providing arms to Ukraine allow Kiev to deal strikes on Russian facilities. And the ambassador of Lithuania to Sweden, former foreign minister of Lithuania, suggested that there might be a potential attack on the Crimean breach with the following publication. If someone hasn't had a chance to take a photo at the Kerch breach, for instance, with regard to the La Manche, the Dover Strait Tunnel, or to some civil infrastructural facility, how would you perceive this? My question, however, is more rhetorical in nature, because their territory used to have an undermined infrastructural project, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, with no investigation following, because everything indicates that they are behind that same act of terrorism. So it turns out not only do they sponsor terrorist activities of the Kiev regime, they they also think as terrorists. The jubilant congratulations of the Westerners on occasion of the act of terrorism on the Crimean bridge were soon deleted, as I have mentioned. They seem to have realized that this is going to be evidence of their terrorist mentality. Is there a potential immediate analogy to Cameron's statements regarding attacks on Russian facilities? Aren't they the same? We are not surprised that the collective West turns a blind eye to all the crimes of the Kiev regime. They also condone and promote them openly, and the words of David Cameron immediately corroborate this version. Not only do they promote others, not only do they push others to the path leading to terrorist activities, they also believe that naturally. They believe this is a normal thing to do. While summarizing, the words of Cameron are yet another piece of evidence of the hybrid war waged by the collective West on Russia, and our country responds to this, and it will respond to this. But there is one more thing that I want to mention. All such projects that have been developed by the collective West or individually by Western countries with regard to other countries, with regard to other organizations or social groups, while giving arms, money, or political support to them, and mainly while pushing them to terrorist extremism, they resulted in the same thing. I mean, this terrorists brought up by the collective West would return to the West ultimately, and this is going to happen this time too. This is happening right as we speak, as the Western arms surface in collective West countries. There are acts of terrorism committed worldwide with these weapons, and these weapons surface in conflict zones, and nobody from Western citizens is protected from not being a victim to that same arms, to that same ideologies that were given by the West to the Kiev regime. By the way, regarding the supplies of arms, by way of exception, we received a question on the eve of this briefing. Still, I would like to include the answer to this question to the main introductory part of our meeting today. The Голос Отечества publication said in their question, is it legitimate for the United States and Western countries to send weapons to Ukraine? Are there any international bans that prohibit this? We have commented on this in multiple times, but we still would like to repeat this. NATO countries, EU countries systematically violate their international obligations to which they are parties, specifically an international treaty or international arms trade treaty and the common position. Various points that the European Union came up with the determining rules for controlling military products, exports, and equipment. For instance, the ATT provides that exporters estimate risks of potential use of arms in terms of IHL, gender violence, and prohibits the export of weapons whenever there is reliable knowledge about an intent of the receiver to use these arms to commit acts of genocide, crimes against humanity, or 1949 Geneva Convention violations, attacking civilian facilities or individuals. As for the common position of the European Union, it sets common rules for controlling exports of military technologies and equipment and bans licensing of export of equipment should there be obvious risks to use military products for domestic repressions in the receiving country or the violation of international humanitarian law, or would contribute to the exacerbation of armed conflicts in the receiving country and would contribute to offensive operations in third countries. Whenever taking decisions about the supplies of weapons, EU member states are also to take into account risks of unharmonized re-export and arms falling into the hands of illegal owners. Multiple precedents of this kind are available according to Europol. The situation regarding human rights in the receiving country and its compliance with international obligations is something to be taken into consideration as well, according to their own standards. Western capitals blatantly violating their political arrangements, agreements that are politically binding, adopted within the OSCE. By the way, adopted within the OSCE on the initiative of the West itself, including primarily the principles regulating the transfer of conventional arms of 1993 and the OSCE document on small and light weapons of 2000 and the OSCE principles concerning man-pad experts of 2008. And something that really exploded Ukraine on the level of its own civilians, its own population, is the change to the consulate services to civilians, to the citizens of Ukraine. There have been two novelties in the Kiev regime's diplomacy. On the 23rd of April, the Ukraine Foreign Ministry introduced a ban on the provision of consular services to Ukrainian men between the ages of 18 to 60. This decision was so controversial, so shocking rather, that even in Ukraine itself many people considered it illegal and even unconstitutional. The motivation of the Kiev regime is clear. Now, in order to replace expired foreign passports, men will be forced to come to Ukraine, where they will be seized and they will be sent to the massacre. The acute shortage of manpower is one of the main problems of the neo-Nazi regime that is losing ground. And hence the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry was mandated to bring everyone back to the country and to block the holes in the line of contact with fresh cannon fodder. A horrific story, considering that the citizens of Ukraine are storming their consular missions, literally being totally unaware of how they're going to stay outside of their own country, without going into detail about Ukrainian patriotism. And a lot has been said about this, and a lot more will be said about this, but let me remind you of the motives used by Zelensky when he came to power, and mainly what motives were used when Zelensky was brought to power by the United States of America. Legitimacy, freedom, human rights, which is the main part. None of this of what the US, the UK, Brussels collectively promised was fulfilled. In fact, the opposite thing was put into practice. Secondly, the same consular service of Ukraine presented a digital avatar of the Office for Consular Affairs, whose image was generated with the help of artificial intelligence. The digital persona was named Victoria She. She because she is sztuczny intellect, as it is in Ukraine for artificial intelligence. That would have been funny and not much to comment on, but it goes beyond this. Not only Kiev refused to talk to Ukrainian citizens whose problems are only multiplying, including abroad, but it also put between itself and real people an artificial barrier, a heartless machine, an artificially generated program. And now this electric lady is going to deal with the issues of the Ukrainian citizens finding themselves abroad. Hundreds of thousands of requests sent to Ukrainian consuls from millions of Ukrainian immigrants. The Ukrainian diplomats are no longer need to answer this. These requests will receive neither response nor addressee. According to the MFA of Ukraine, it is for Robert now to talk to the Ukrainians, which is a convenient thing to do, but it exposes yet another issue. This is something that makes the Kiev regime and its MFA irresponsible to deny consular services to the Ukrainians abroad means to violate the constitution. There are no legal norms that would justify such a violation. Any attempts of diplomats to explain these developments make them unlawful too, as they become target to court claims, proceedings, and other documentary issues. Hence, Victoria Shi.
Internet.
And she is the internet robot who will be responsible for all the crimes in this direction, all the crimes of the Kiev regime. And I would also like to say that apparently such robots will be appearing time and again because these are real people who Zelensky kills. He is exterminating the population of Ukraine, and we are apparently in for a reincarnation, a cloning of Victoria Shi in agriculture, at the factories, at schools, hospitals, and so on and so forth. And yet, another problem which was highlighted when this decision was made, the appearance of a dark-skinned model, public person Rosalina Bre was copied to the image of this robot. Obviously, in order to white knight the Kiev regime from the neo-Nazi reputation, which is well known in the West, this was done. Just look at Ukraine. Just look at its diplomacy. In the consular direction, Ukraine is being represented by a dark-skinned model. For sure, Western grants were allocated for this. We were allocated for promotion of the LGBTQ agenda, for the creation of a speaker's position in the structures of the territorial defense of the armed forces of Ukraine for transgender Sarah Ashton Chirilo. But later on, we ran out of funds, and we ran out of Chirilo as well. So the opposite has already happened the way it always does. In her social networks, Nombria now complains that Ukrainians write to her with racist comments, and indoctrinated by neo-Nazi ideology, carrying this neo-Nazi disease, users of the Ukrainian-speaking segment of the internet directly insult the black model. They believe that she cannot and should not represent Kiev. This is so much in line of the policy of Zelensky and of all of those deceits that we have been committing. I don't know whether this avatar has started working, but the mathematical algorithm that will have to answer all the questions of citizens has already highlighted if it was already clear. We see racism, xenophobia reign in the territories controlled by the Kiev regime. The regime on Bankova is not at all interested in the fate of its own citizens, and they are only interested as cannon fodder, potential cannon fodder, very expendable material. Nobody cares about the civil rights and political freedoms. The situation in the public administration system in Ukraine is not only deteriorating, it comes to at a dead end. It drags the country in a total nosedive. And the country of Ukraine continues with its greatest debt, its fight against the Russian language. And the writing of history in Ukraine now comes as no surprise, because it is now lawful, and it's with a special zeal that the Zelensky regime is busy at approaching the Russian language and all things that have to do with Russian language. The new Moldova High Commissioner for Human Rights, or as we put it, Sprechenführer, Taras Crimean, thanks to the efforts of the Kiev, starts started the forcible Ukrainization, and those school students who study Russian, their number lowered by nearly 2 times. And you can now only study Russian as a separate subject in free schools, but at the same time, they cannot exterminate it. Even those people at Banco failed at this, because it was Taras Crimean himself who complained on April 17 that the TV channels of Ukraine, they speak both Ukrainian and Russian. We have no subtitles. We do not dub the Russian language. But at the same time, he said that from the 17th of July 2024, this practice will come to an end. What I'm talking about is what on January the 1st, the law on the media came to power, and the segment of Ukrainian language on TV and radio has grown to 90%. And you can also talk in the indigenous languages of Ukraine or the languages of national minorities, which are official languages of the EU. However, this number has been lowered to 30% of them. However, the law states at the same time, but this does not apply to the Russian language, and we hear applause for that in the Council of Europe. On the 17th of July, another norm comes to power. It's another norm of the same law, which puts forward the criteria of a Ukrainian language basis of the program. And according to this norm, all those words of people who talk on TV, if they talk not in Ukrainian language, could only come up to more than 10% of the whole duration. And it makes me wonder how we're going to do this. Is there going to be another Victoria Shi who is going to measure that, the length of their speeches? When you replay a program or you replay a live recording, such sayings should be dubbed or subtitles in Ukrainian should be added. You can only make exceptions for direct lives, and you can also use idioms on the languages of indigenous people. So this just comes to some point of absurdity, because for languages which are spoken in the EU, which are spoken by the minority of the Ukrainian locals, are being stepped up on. But at the same time, we're trying to prohibit Russian language. We just disrespect their own constitution, which has a direct norm of defending the use of Russian language. And I would also like to remind you that Zelensky promised to defend the Russian language, as well as he promised to stop the war. The fight against the Russian language takes ugly and repulsive forms. On April 22nd of this year, Ukrainian media spread information about a 13-year-old boy being hit mercilessly at his school because his classmates fought, and let me highlight that they only fought, but he was watching a cartoon in Russian. It just makes me wonder whether they know what language they use in the Ukrainian army. Have they seen the videos of Ukrainian army officers? So how does one have to brainwash the children of Ukraine so that they would behave in that way? There's not a single day in Ukraine that passes without a language-related scandal. People fight over this language issue. And this situation is the consequence of the ideology of neo-Nazism and the extermination of all things Russian, and turning Ukraine into anti-Russia. We have already highlighted what, as a thank you for exterminating the ties with Russia, Washington and Brussels turned a blind eye to all the human rights violation in Ukraine. They said to the Council of Europe that they do not think themselves, we don't think that they are obliged to abide by the laws which have to do with human rights. And I would like to remind you that we were annual reports of the MFA of Russia on the Nazism in the world, on the human rights situations in separate countries, as well as on Ukraine, on neo-Nazism and the spread of racism. This only justifies the importance of the denazification of Ukraine by the special military operation. And now coming to the situation in Moldova. We see the same problem happening here. The West is just turning this country into its wordless slave, and we continue to follow the situation in Moldova. Its current leadership, which considers themselves not Moldovans but Romanians, is pursuing a policy of internal repression that repeats the experience of Ukraine and the Baltic states and is aimed at returning the republic into a powerless appendage of the EU and NATO. Here are a number of recent examples. Tight censorship of the media has been established in the country. On April 26, the Broadcasting Council fined two Gagauz TV channels for, as they put it, disinformation. The regulator was dissatisfied with the stories about the absence of democracy in Moldova, dependence of Moldovan authorities on Romania, loss of Moldovan identity, statehood, and traditional values. So what is wrong about that? It just makes me wonder, because this is just what Sandu publicly talks about this, and she puts this as a national policy. We also see more pressure being exercised on the political opposition. A criminal case was fabricated against the head of Gagauzia, Eugenia Gutsol. According to independent Moldovan experts, the real reason for the case was the participation of the head of the region in the Congress of Moldovan Opposition in Moscow on April 21st, where at the creation of electoral bloc Victory was announced. Under pretext of European integration, the Chisinau regime is working to eliminate the Moldovan identity, and on April 26th, Parliament Speaker Ingrid Grosso said that Moldovans, if they want to become part of, as he put it, a big family of European Union, should call themselves Romanians and their language Romanian. It turns out that for Moldovans who consider themselves Moldovans, the entrance to this, as they put it, big family is closed. And I would like to say this to those who know that there is a Moldovan language and who think themselves Moldovan and not Romanian, who do not think that they are part of some other nationality. We do not think that they are some kind of a different nationality. You're not being welcome to a big family of European Union, because this is some kind of a sect. This is only principles which are being exercised in a cult, in a religious cult, because we're trying to strip you of your self-identification, of your will, of your understanding of the values of your nation, of your ancestors, of your family. A legislative basis for rewriting history is being formed in Moldova. On April 13th, the government approved amendments to the law on monuments, according to which it can initiate the dismantling of a monument administered by local authorities if it, quote-unquote, violates public order and good morals, quote-unquote. Opposition politicians and civil activists have expressed fears that these changes could be used to demolish monuments to Soviet liberators. And we all remember too well about the good morals that they have been spreading. We all remember the good morals of the fascist and Nazi troops. That's how they put this in all of the papers that they spread at the occupied terrorists. They said that they were good, and that the government, the authority that the occupied locals lived in were bad, were evil. Please reread these papers. I'm going to add links to these materials and leaflets to the text of today's briefing. Earlier, we drew attention to Chisinau's double standards with regard to mercenarism. According to the Moldovan criminal code, it is a criminal offense, but the authorities turn a blind eye to the actions of Moldovan citizens fighting for money on the side of Ukrainian armed forces. This serious policy was confirmed once again on April 24th, and the commander of the Vrbětice unit of Moldovan and Romanian mercenaries published a statement in which he said that his fighters are ready to act from the shadows to limit Russian influence in Romania and Moldova, even if their methods may be considered terrorist, quote-unquote. There has been no response from Moldovan agencies to these threats. Such a course of actions not only enrages Moldovan citizens but also embarrasses the Western curators of a Moldovan regime. Even the United States State Department in its 2023 Human Rights Report had to acknowledge such problems in Moldova's selective, politically motivated application of laws. And this is a direct quote. Widespread corruption in state institutions, torture and other cruel and degrading treatment. Even Amnesty International, known for its biased approach, and I'm talking about approach biased when it comes to Russia and all things Russian, even Amnesty International could not turn a blind eye to the fact that Moldova violated the rights to freedom of association, freedom of speech, and privacy in its report. And as independent Moldovan political analysts point out, the incompetence of Maria Zakharova's team turned in the eyes of Western sponsors in the so-called suitcase without a handle, which is uncomfortable to carry and miserable to throw away. One can argue with that, but as it is known, the collective West always does not hesitate to get rid of former favorites, which are no longer profitable for it. And now to say a few words about the so-called defense policy of the European Union, because we are continuing with the so-called forced militarization, and it seems that there is nothing left of the former strategies, and new long-term military strategies are plans aimed at the realization of opportunistic adventures the current EU leadership are being done to put the economy on military rails. And on March 5th, the first European defense industry strategy was presented. Its main goal is to promote joint military procurement of the member states under the control of the European Commission and to join forces with the NATO in this direction. To put this into practice, a European defense industry program was established, which is designed to raise 1.5 billion euros from the budget of the European Union, and they plan to step up on the cooperation in Ukraine in the field of defense, and as well as to step up on the industrial and technological base of Ukraine. This promoted myth of the threats coming from the East are just being used to justify the hybrid war of the West, which we are maintaining to maintain the global dominance. We want to a strategic defeat of Russia. We are against a multipolar world being formed. All of this is being carried out forcibly under the pressure of the US and their military cooperation to the detriment of social and economic well-being, as well as the attempts of growth, stability and security in Eurasia. The current authorities of European Union are some kind of mediators of the American dictate. They're stripping European Union of its political independence and international authority and turn it into a covenant of NATO, which depends on the orders coming from Washington. And we are convinced that such a policy is not in the best interest of Europe and its locals. It's quite obvious that the multi-billion-dollar financial and military investments of the EU, which were taken from the pockets of ordinary European citizens and sent to support the Kiev regime, will never return to them. So this is a stake at the death of the European Union, because we know that all the weapons which come to Ukraine will be destructed, and grants and loans will be plundered by the corrupt Ukrainian politicians, which are actively buying up elite real estate in Europe and the US, where they plan to hide from responsibility for all their actions. And now, as for speculations in the media about the passage of our ships in the Baltic Straits. The hysteria being whipped up in the Danish media, and they cite as a pretext environmental disaster threat in the Baltic Sea. We say that the Russian side use vessels which are unfit for navigation or lack insurance documents. I want to address Copenhagen. You know, but near you have your allies who have blown up Nord Stream 1 and 2, have caused huge ecological harm to your countries, to the countries of your region. the countries of the Baltic countries. But you shut up. You were silent about this. And now you complain about Russian tankers, Russian oil tankers. You complain about them because they could possibly be detrimental to the ecology of the Baltic Sea, and they proceed from the fact that the procedure of ships' passage through the straits is regulated by the Copenhagen Treaty of 1857 and the provisions of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea in 1982. According to these documents, all vessels, including Russian ones, have a right to impeded and safe passage through the Baltic Straits. Arbitrary writing of the norms of international law is inadmissible, and any effort at limiting the right of navigation of Russian vessels will be interpreted as an unfriendly action, which will inevitably be followed by tough retaliation measures.
I would be remiss if I didn't say a couple words about the tragic comedy. It isn't a conclusion. Maybe it's just a pause in the investigation that took place in Czechia on the so-called Vrbětice case. On the 29th of April this year, the Czech authorities officially announced that the investigation of the explosions at military depots in Vrbětice locality was postponed. Believe it or not, in accordance with a joint statement, it is said, and I quote directly, the Russian military intelligence was involved in the explosion because it isn't the only such example as illustrated by long-term preparation of intelligence activities in Europe and Ukraine. Further, in that same material, they say the following. In order to continue the investigation, the Czech police lacks some information, including data on the movements of the intelligence officers in Czech Republic. According to Prague, this information may not be obtained because the suspects reside in Russia. What can I say? The outcomes of the investigation of 2014 explosions in military depots in Czech Republic only confirm the put up and paid for nature of the accusations made against Russia, which in 2021 served as a trigger for undermining bilateral relations and completely curtailing mutually beneficial cooperation. It was that simple how the authorities in Prague lie to their own people. This is how they cover up the traces of the crimes committed in Czechia under carpet. They literally put these traces, sweep them under carpet of their own irresponsibility and lies. The conclusions of the investigation are ludicrous. They are below all criticism. As it seems, they knew everything about Russia, hence you accused us of everything without any court, without any investigation whatsoever. When it came to a real investigation with actual traces, with actual evidence, and all this happened on your territory, it turns out you lack information. 3 years after unsubstantiated allegations of Russia's alleged involvement in the bombings a decade ago, the Czech police are forced to state that there is no information necessary for further progress in the investigation and declare the case postponed due to the Russian side's refusal to provide the evidence Prague needs. It is ludicrous, but deplorable too, because this whole story shows the political order to accuse Russia as usually diligently executed by Prague under the control of London and Washington. Apparently, it was generously rewarded, since even the inglorious end of the so-called investigation did not embarrass anyone in the Czech Republic. Everyone seems to understand that what would follow should they start asking inconvenient questions to Prague. And now the act of canceling Russian signs is happening right as we speak. It happened last week, to be more precise. This time, earth sciences, geology, was in the crosshairs of by-science functionaries. The International Union of Geological Sciences published on its website an appeal called the participation of the Russian Federation in the International Geological Congress scheduled for August 25th to the 31st of August this year in Busan of the Republic of Korea. The statement says that presentations and abstracts submitted by Russian scientists in Russian institutions will be refused, and this decision is explained by some sanctions policy against our country. Moreover, as we have learned previously, the organizing committee of the Congress itself made the participation of Russian scientists conditional on the change of Russian affiliation to any other affiliation. By way of reminder, the International Union of Geological Sciences is an international non-governmental organization founded in 1961 and uniting national scientific unions in order to form a global geological community. The statutes of this organization state that it should promote participation of geoscientists in international endeavors regardless of race, citizenship, language, political stance, or gender. It is obvious that this respectable scientific organization is not mandated, and it should not be mandated, to deal with issues related to the maintenance of international peace and security and territoriality and sovereignty. This is the competence of different entities. Yet, time and again, it tries to instrumentalize the field of scientific cooperation or to serve someone else's politically motivated interests or orders. Remember that in 2022, the Executive Committee of the Union adopted a decision contrary to its statutes to cancel the International Geological Congress to be held in St. Petersburg in 2028. We regret to see the Union persistently, in contrary to its obligation to provide advisory support to UNESCO, consistently pursuing a policy of restrictions and exclusions with respect to Russia and its expert community. They also add a tint of racism to this. It becomes so obvious that nobody even conceals this. This is a blatant manifestation of discrimination against representatives of science on national grounds, which violates not only the Union statutes, but also grossly violates the right of every person to participate in scientific progress to enjoy its benefits enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, paragraph 27.1. It is not difficult to guess that the legitimate actions of the Union and other similar organizations are caused by the desire to influence the political choice of the domestic scientific community and to polarize the Russian society as a whole. As is known, our country has the strongest scientific school in the field of geological sciences. The results of scientific research of our compatriots have traditionally been published in highly rated scientific journals, presented and discussed at leading international events. They simply appeared there in publications at the conference because they enriched world science. All this time, Soviet and then Russian scientists made a significant contribution to the Union's activities. Exclusion of Russian researchers from the international scientific dialogue deprives it of its representativeness and causes damage to world science, the scale of which and the consequences for the future are difficult to even estimate. We are convinced that the sensible world majority realizes this and does not succumb to the manipulations of those who are trying to solve the immediate political ambitious and bold in a negative sense problems, sacrificing the progress of all mankind. For our part, we continue to consistently advocate for the development of fair international scientific cooperation, including for addressing the global challenges facing humanity and responding to transboundary challenges. Today, we celebrate the World Press Freedom Day, as was declared by the UN General Assembly in 1993. Its ideological mission is to sensitize people to free journalism, to protection of journalists' rights, and to creation of conducive conditions for their safe efforts. Russia is committed to guaranteeing pluralism of the media, unimpeded access to information. To us, media freedoms are a mandatory attribute of a truly democratic society. The media situation has been degrading year in, year out in the collective West. This makes us draw a deplorable conclusion. This isn't the approach shared by everyone who call themselves Democrats. I mean countries. In fact, promises enshrined in multiple international treaties to meet journalists' rights have been stomped upon right as we speak. In spite of all these obligations, there are these countries that have assumed these obligations. They continue creating impediments to free activities of journalists, at the same time lecturing us on the freedom of speech, independence of the press. They lecture us, they lecture other countries too, while seeming to ignore hostile acts of terrorism against terrorists, against journalists in Kiev, oppression of the media in Chisinau. They seem to ignore what's happening in the Baltic states and other parts of the world. The West is mopping up the media space of inconvenient truths while using all the repressive arsenal of the political or some civilization contents. They allowed to use media violence against people of certain racial and belonging or certain citizenship. This is something that happened sometime in the past when major social platforms allowed users to call upon the killings, allowed calls to kill Russians. This was a horrific fact that cannot be changed now. Regardless of the Western hypocrisy regarding the freedom of speech, but it isn't the only fact. The hypocrisy is also symbolized as well, and not only this, fake, cynical violence, or cynical brutality with regard to Julian Assange is yet another symbol of these false democracies. He's been persecuted for his convictions, for his journalist activities, and no guarantees of Washington will protect him from given just 175 years in prison. They present this as triumph of humanism. Nobody's in enlightened West was touched by the tragedy of America. Chilean journalist Gonzalo Lira, who was tortured to death in Ukrainian prisons. Nobody cared about targeted killings of Russian journalists, of military correspondents and public activists that were killed by Kiev regime and its agents: Daria Dugina, Vladlen Tatarsky, Oleg Klokov, Rostislav Zhuravlev, Boris Maksudov, Semyon Yeremin. We haven't heard a single word of compassion from officials in Washington or Brussels. These journalists were killed through acts of terrorism. That same silence has been kept by relevant international entities such as UNESCO or the OSCE, as they are working in accordance with the order of the West to keep silence. This immediately results. This culpable indifference because of the condonance of neo-Nazi daredevils in Ukraine. This results in the fact that the Kiev regime no longer disclaims its association with these atrocities. They really carry out bravados and promising new acts of terror. Additionally, they promise new killings of journalists, and nobody in the West is checking the Kiev regime on this subject, let alone criticize them. They only provide millions and billions of money to fight the freedom of speech, among other things. This runs counter totally to the ideals of the World Press Day. We cannot allow that its original sense is cancelled and made a travesty of itself. The rights of the media and journalists are not privilege for the chosen one, but it's integral value of a healthy society and strong, self-confident state. On the 8th of April, we marked the 80th anniversary of the commencement of the Crimean offensive operation, which ended on May 12th with the complete liberation of the peninsula. In 1941-1942, Hitlerites could not take Sevastopol for as many as 9 months. Not only men, but also women stood up to defend Sevastopol. For their exploits in those days, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union was awarded to machine gunner Nina Anilova and sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko. They would say war does not have a woman's face and war is not a woman's business, but a feet might have a woman's face still. In total, in the Crimea in 1941-1942, the Germans lost about 100,000 people. For Hitler, Crimea was of great strategic and ideological importance, as he believed that the peninsula should become a kind of place of rest, a recreational area for the German Aryan nation. Nazi propaganda, even before the war, called Crimea Gotenland, which is a mythical ancestral home of the Germans, to which they planned to relocate this nationality, while destroying the local population. During the occupation of the territory of Crimea, Nazis and their accomplices created concentration and filtration camps, numerous prisons and camps for POWs. Hitler's security enforcement units pursued a policy of genocide, destroyed civilian population, guerrillas, underground fighters, POWs. The terrible crime of Hitlerites just before their escape was the massacre of the locals of the town of Stary Krim on the April 12, 1944. They killed 584 civilians of this locality, women, children, the elderly. In total, during their stay in the Crimea, Hitlerites shot dead 72,000 people, and more than 18,000 Crimeans were tortured in prisons and camps. Additionally, on the territory of Crimea, the invaders destroyed 45,000 Soviet soldiers who were in captivity. The Crimea was liberated by the 4th Ukrainian Front, commanded by Fyodor Ivanovich Stolbuchin. The storming of Sevastopol began at 8 a.m. on May 5, 1944. By the evening of the 9th of May, Sevastopol was completely liberated. Germans had been taking the city for 250 days. Our troops managed to break the German defense and enter the harbor of Sevastopol literally in 4 days. However, Soviet soldiers showed true heroism. Exactly 1 year before the end of the Great Patriotic War, on May 9, 1944, Sevastopol, the city of glory, the pride of Russian sailors, was liberated. The remains of the Germans fled to Cape Chersones. From here, the enemy, under fire from Soviet artillery, made desperate attempts to escape to Romania. Lightning-fast attack of the Soviet troops disrupted the retreat of the enemy. Many ships in the bays and at sea were hit and sunk. As a result, most of the Romanian Black Sea fleet, up to 2/3 of it, was destroyed. By noon of May 12th, the remaining German-Romanian troops were completely captured. The Battle of the Crimea and Sevastopol became, for the German troops, a catastrophe. With the liberation of Sevastopol, the Soviet Union regained the main naval base of the Black Sea Fleet, providing fire and logistic support for further offensive and the expulsion of Nazis from Moldova and the Balkan countries. The religious dimension of this event is also significant. The cradle of Russian Orthodoxy, the ancient Chersones, where Saint Prince Vladimir was baptized, was freed from fascist filth. The complete liberation of Crimea created the bridgehead for further strategic steps of the Red Army in the south and direction of Soviet-German front. We should also add that in February 1945, the Crimean land became the venue for the Yalta Conference of the big three leaders, where the most important issue of the post-war world order were decided. The very next day, Moscow saluted the soldiers who liberated Sevastopol. Courage and heroism of soldiers were recognized with state awards. 126 of them were awarded the high title of Hero of the Soviet Union. 118 units and formations of the army and the navy were named in honor after Sevastopol. 51 unit and formation were awarded orders on May the 1st, 1945. By order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Sevastopol was named a hero city. And now we currently approach one of the most, the most important day in the history of our country, which is the Victory Day. The MFA, General Central Office, territorial offices, representations in the Russian regions, diplomatic, consular, constitutions abroad, are taking active participation in its celebration according to the established tradition. On the eve of the holiday, on May the 8th, the flower-laying ceremony will be held at the Russian Foreign Ministry. The ceremony will be attended by Minister Lavrov, Ministry's leadership, veterans, young diplomats. As a part of the Victory Day celebration, the historical documentary exhibition Diplomacy and the Liberation Mission of the Red Army in Central and Southern Europe is planned to be placed in the lobby of the central building of the Russian Foreign Ministry with publication of relevant materials online. Abroad, Russian diplomatic missions become, without exaggeration, centers of such celebrations. Depending on the conditions of stay in the countries of accreditation, the holiday programs of our diplomatic missions include visits to veterans with congratulations, gifts and flowers, film festivals of war films, concerts, contests of frontline songs, drawings, posters, theme radio programs, articles and speeches by ambassadors in the central mass media, historical and documentary exhibitions, open Russian language lessons dedicated to Victory Day, ceremonial rulings, ceremonial meetings in schools and diplomatic missions, the traditional victory dictation, the Garden of Memory, victory windows, minute of silence, candle of memory campaigns, gala evenings and receptions. We know the unchanging interest from year to year in the St. George ribbon, which has become the main attribute of Victory Day, not only in Russia.
Our compatriots in many European countries as well as in other continents will come to honor the memory of the heroes of a great patriotic war as part of the Immortal Regiment campaign. Online format will allow to expand the circles of participants in this action, which has already become worldwide. It unites those who truly cherish the memory of a generation of heroes of a great patriotic war, and as part of the World Action 5 memory, meetings will be held with compatriots, veterans, and a number of countries representatives of the Popular Front to transfer lamps of particles of eternal flame to local museums, libraries, educational institutions, and temples. In 2024, the fire will be delivered to 14 countries in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Particularly responsible events are the laying of flowers and wreaths at monuments, graves, and memorials to fallen Soviet soldiers, prisoners of war, and civilians who died in Nazi captivity. Ceremonies are already taking place or are planned in all countries, and we cover it in detail on our social networks. In all countries without exception, which were liberated by soldiers of the Red Army, such events are going to be organized. The same applies to countries where underground fighters and partisans fought and where our citizens were imprisoned. We regularly talk about the difficult situation in the memorial sphere with the blasphemous and cynical war monuments, and we have talked about this at briefings as well. Now, Russophobic attacks will be able to overshadow our brightest holiday. And even in countries with unfavorable conditions, there are people who, together with our colleagues, come to lay flowers. We do so despite of the understanding of what they can become subject to repressions of the unfriendly regimes, and the full support of those who remember the decisive contribution of the Soviet Union to the defeat of Nazism. This inspires optimism and gives strength in the fight against attempts to falsify and distort the history of the Second World War, to degrade and desecrate the memory of the warrior liberator. Despite all opposition, Russian diplomats pay tribute to those who sacrificed their lives for the sake of the future, who saved the world from the brown plague, and made it possible to lay the foundation of a world order that would be based on internal law enshrined in the United Nations Charter. All the events which have been announced are covered on our social media accounts, and all messages are accompanied by the relevant hashtags. We will give you a link to that in the text of today's briefing. You can also address yourself to resources of our embassies and the social networks of our foreign missions. And now, for fighting neo-Nazism, May the 1st in the Pobeda Park, a exhibition of the trophy weapons and equipment of the Western countries is being opened today. I'm talking about those which has been seized by the settlements of Vrbětice and other settlements. Where also information sense, you have tactical characteristics and the places where this equipment or weapons were seized, where more than 300 numbers from Sweden, Australia, South Africa, Ukraine, among the exhibits, you can find BMP Bradley, Marder, BMY Abrams tank, Leopard 2 tank, M777 howitzer, various light armored vehicles, and many others. The exhibition tents also contain samples of small arms and engineering weapons of the armies of foreign countries which are members of a NATO military political bloc, as well as unmanned aerial vehicles, combinations, and equipment. The NATO combat vehicles brought grief and misfortune to the inhabitants of Donbass and Avenue regions of Russia, and now they stand defeated. I would like to emphasize the way our country did that. We did so with dignity. And this was a retaliation measure to the NATO countries which made exhibitions of our equipment before the embassies of Russia abroad, which endangered the work of our foreign missions. It was an embarrassment to these very countries, and their own citizens talked about this. We brought flowers to the Soviet equipment, Soviet weapons. We failed to achieve their goal in the way we wanted to do that. We held a wide discussion as when it comes to retaliation measures. They said and mocked us. They said that we could not do that, but we did manage to hold a similar meeting, but did so with dignity. We do it so that it's understood who we are fighting against. I want people to understand the difference between falsehood and honesty, between the good and the evil. We're not doing so to embarrass ourselves. We want to embarrass the process of dehumanization, which tries to climb the pedestal of the world order. And I would like to highlight that all this equipment comes to several millions of dollars in price. This equipment will be of interest to many people, and we see the unprecedented interest of the public. And people come from other cities as well as from other countries to see the defeated equipment of the enemy. Diplomats and military attaches, which are represented in our country, also visit this exhibition, because we know that strength is in truth, and this what we have seen from 1943 to 1948, because I'll remind you what during this year in the Moscow Gorky Park of Culture and Recreation, an exhibition of samples of trophy weapons captured from Nazi Germany in 1941 to 1943 was held. And those who have forgotten the terrible lessons of World War II, we remind you that no Western military equipment will change the situation on the battlefield, and the enemy will be defeated. And let me remind you, the exhibition will be open until June the 1st this year from 10 in the morning to 8 in the evening. And now for your questions. Is Международная жизнь here with us? Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. I would like to get a comment on the position of Russia on the resolution of the UNGA on Srebrenica. Where was a response by Mr. Nebenzia at the Security Council meeting on Dayton agreements on April 13th this year, of a suggestion of establishing an International Day of Memory of the Victims of Genocide. And Srebrenica is a politicized initiative which is being promoted by the permanent representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the United Nations in New York. It enjoys support of the NATO countries, but at the same time, these are the NATO countries who are accountable for the tragedy in Yugoslavia, which led to the deaths of people of different ethnical and confessional groups in Srebrenica and around it. The project of a corresponding resolution, which was up to being studied by the UNGA, can not bring the national conciliation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It can only add up to the differences which we see on the Balkans, because it's anti-Serb in its nature. It does have references to the decisions of International Tribunal on the former Yugoslavia, which cannot be deemed as just as to regard to the Serbs. These decisions do not enjoy support from the Baltic states and the world on the whole. Of principal importance is the fact that such an initiative is being promoted in the violation of domestic procedures of Bosnia and Herzegovina, because the Republic of Serbia has expressed its lack of desire to admit to this, to agree to this. And the positional documents addressed to the UN Secretary General and the President of UNGE have been sent, or we do not want this resolution to be adopted. And they also want to strip Mr. Logunje of his authority. We call on the authorities of the draft resolution to revoke their document. The resolution 69-323 establishes a single date of the 9th of December as a memory day for all the victims of genocide, no matter where such genocide was being carried out. The only exceptions made for Rwanda, which the International Day of Memory for Rwanda had been established before that. And another question is that on April 29, the Moldovan media said that the passenger bus from St. Petersburg to Tiraspol, which had Moldovan citizens on it, stood at the border for more than 2 days for an inspection. In the words of the passengers, way past the falsehood detector, we were asked who Crimea belonged to, and were asked of the opinion on the situation in Ukraine. How could you comment on that? We have already said that these are the European values, because in leaflets, in pictures, we are presented as a way to democracy, human rights, but in reality, this is what we see. This is what the Sandor regime is preaching. I don't know whether these are some repressive tools. Maybe you can qualify them in a different way, but I think that Moldovan citizens have already expressed the opinion on that. Is Vestia here with us? Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We want to know whether Armenia can lead a CSTO in February, and there were any decisions which have been made after Pashinyan's decision to freeze Armenia's membership on the CSTO. How can the situation develop? During our previous briefings, we have already commented that on your question whether Armenia can leave CSTO should be addressed to Yerevan. We still do not doubt the sovereign right of our Armenian partners to determine the foreign policy, including that inside the CSTO. But let me remind you that the Article 19 of the Charter contains a norm on the possible withdrawal from this congregation. But one should send an official notice no later than 6 months prior to leaving the organization. But as we know, there have been no further steps made. So we come from the fact that Armenia is still a full-fledged member of the CSTO and has relevant responsibilities under the 1992 treaty, the 2002 Charter, and other documents. We are convinced that under any circumstances, the CSTO still remains an important and effective structure which is responsible for maintaining security and peace in Eurasia and on the territory of its member states. Together with our allies, we continue our intensive work on stepping up on the multi-sectoral cooperation in fighting against threats to our security and new challenges. Where our new meetings which will take place from May to June under the presidency of Kazakhstan. This includes a ministerial meeting on June 21st. And another question on the law of foreign agencies. How do you think it could influence Euro integration in Georgia? You want too much from me. It's difficult to understand why this question is addressed to us. Russia has nothing to do with Georgian legislation of the plans of Euro integration or further development or of a situation which is being monitored by the whole world. I see that the manifestants in Georgia seem to be sensitive to the efforts of the Western propaganda to find a Russian trace, and you know what were no Russian trace. We even mock the symbols of Russia. This could be a provocation, but no matter how sad this is, we see that such provocations happen in Georgia as well, and unfortunately, nobody is immune to that. So I am sure that this question should not be addressed to me. However, we understand that the response to your question has already been given by the European Brussels and by Washington, who were direct in saying that this draft law violates democratic values. We want them to give a definition of democratic values. Maybe we will give us a list in Washington and Brussels, some kind of norms for a democratic world order, because we are yet to see that. I think that the same applies to democratic values. If you find a list of them, please send it to us. In Washington and in Brussels, they said that the adoption of such document will be an obstacle on Georgia's way to integration in the European Union. You know what? This is a derivative of the law which are operating in the US and the other Western countries. Are these double standards? Yes and no, because this is not just double standards, this is some kind of extermination of any kind of standard, and that is it. You know, Russia has never interfered and has no plans of interfering into domestic affairs of third countries. We're interested in the ecological, sustainable development of countries of South Caucasus. Another question from us. You have already said that our diplomatic missions are preparing for celebrating Victory Day. Are there any kind of provocations now? Yes, unfortunately, we see provocations being carried out non-stop. You see the desecration of monuments. You see what being spray painted. When people who try to lay flowers to these monuments are also being harassed. It's prohibited to take part in such ceremonies in some countries. Invitations to our representatives to those ceremonies who pay tribute to the heroes of the Second World War. So those invitations are not being sent to Russian diplomats, and they'll look into each and every case in particular. Some of us will be dubbed publicly at our briefings. Some of these issues are being solved without any public announcement, but you know what, this is just an enumeration. I'm just being brief. However, work is being conducted throughout the year on preventing such provocations and minimizing their damage. Our foreign missions fight for the historical memory of the Second World War, and we do so 24/7. Thank you, thank you. Is the Media Corporation of China here with us? Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We have the questions here. The policy of New York has started to arrest the students of University of New York and the Columbian University who are taking part in the protest actions and the policy of the U.S. administration in Gaza. However, many human rights organizations have already expressed their opinions, as well as the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights. They said that these measures were too harsh and unproportional. But at the same time, in the last 10 days, about 900 students from different American universities have been arrested. How could you comment on that? You know, I just have to suppress a laugh because this is laughable. However, it isn't a very important subject, but it just looks comical because on the very same day, the United States care about the demonstrants in Georgia, but at the same time, we're fighting against the protesters in their own country. I think that the National Guard is yet to participate in that, but all the rest of the measures are being taken. But it's not just double standards, some kind of a dichotomy, because which has been in place for more than 2 weeks. We see that there are student protests there which are in full swing, and the students want to support Palestine. These protesters remind us of protests against the American war in Vietnam, and there's even American experts who talk about that. But American authorities put a special focus on the special services being involved. And it just makes me wonder that the American authorities pay tribute to the situation on the square of Tiananmen. They speak about the Chinese students who fell victims to the Chinese authorities, but at the same time the U.S. is doing the very same thing.
They're doing these same things to their own students, literally crossing their own laws on the freedom of speech, on the freedom of meetings, rallies, and they violate their international obligations too. This is yet another illustration of double standards, of lack of standards, and also degrading treatment of people based on their own political situation. Now they are beating up American students, while at the same time blackwashing protesters in the Congress, in the media. They prefer to support rally members throughout the world, but whenever it concerns their own protestants inside of the country, their own punitive machine is working fine and well. Based on the previous election campaign, and now we see that they're well tested in this. The number of those supporting the rally exceeds 2,000 people. The number of detainees grows. How can the United States lecture anyone after this on security, on mass events, human rights measures? These punitive measures do not pacify the manifestants. Instead, they result only in the seizure of premises, because the authorities taught the students that their human rights are sacred. And now it turns out it is the other way around. Some universities decided to switch to remote education models. They cancelled graduation ceremonies, or they're questioning if they have not cancelled this. The financial capital of the U.S., New York, is also facing on the 30th of April, there have been a storming operation against the Columbia University, one of the oldest universities of the United States. 300 people were detained. Now compare this to the freedom of meetings, freedom of assemblies. 300 people were apprehended with counterterrorism units involved. Will they be qualified by U.S. authorities as domestic terrorists, the same way they qualified those detained after previous election? It isn't our normal trend to comment on domestic situation in sovereign states, but we'll make an exception with regard to the United States, because they continuously patronize everyone. They continuously interfere in domestic affairs of other countries. Russia, first and foremost, they note individual discrepancies and mistakes in certain countries of the world. Now it is time for Washington to draw the attention to their own domestic issues, to their own points and bottlenecks, massive issues that are still growing. It is time to check whether human rights actually been observed in the United States, including that of youths women. I'm sure transgender people are taking part in this protest. How about their rights? Are all the apprehension cases well grounded? Are they all being treated in accordance with the norms of human dignity? By the way, I hope very much that the United States of America will raise this question during the UN Security Council meeting, or rather during the United Nations Human Rights Council meeting, whether any cases of police brutality. We are looking forward to hearing the speech of the Secretary of State Blinken condemning U.S. police for their actions against peaceful demonstrants, against peaceful protesters. Hope they will draw their attention to this fact. And there has been a publication on the 25th of April, a report on the human rights situation describing all these unworthy things. Our second question. Recently, your colleague, spokesperson of the MFA of China, Lin Jian, said in response to the words of Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, that the normal trade and economic exchange between Russia and China should not be in any way prohibited. The U.S. promised to take measures unless the PRC stops supporting the Russian Federation. Diplomats said China is not an initiator nor a party to the Ukraine crisis, and it does not add fuel to fire, and it would not use an opportunity to profit from this. Mentioning that the United States have been supplying weapons to Ukraine, munitions. How do you take the words uttered by your counterpart? Indeed, Washington has been trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China for quite a while, to no avail, while the United States have been trying to double contain our countries. We noted on multiple occasions the balanced and consistent position of China on the Ukraine crisis. Beijing emphasized the constructive role and the readiness to play a constructive role in political diplomatic settlement. The president of the PRC, Xi Jinping, noted an idea to convene an international peace conference if this is recognized at the same time by Moscow and Kiev, and provide an opportunity to discuss all peace initiatives. As for Russia-China cooperation, builds on principles of respectable, equitable, trust-based partnership and mutually supporting key areas for both parties, which is, and here is the value of Russia-China strategic coherence, something we have been emphasizing on multiple occasions. It is not directed against other countries. It is not subjected to external factors. Whereas rhetoric from overseas is nothing else but an attempt to shift the blame. Indeed, they seek to shift their own blame, try to accuse others of their own mistakes. Multiple unilateral restrictions of Washington expose irrational governance system of the United States itself that failed in addressing their own domestic issues and additionally human rights issues, and they use instead non-market, illegal market competition methods, including various protectionist tricks and politically biased tools of trade war. Lusa of Portugal, are you with us? Ms. Zakharova, we have two questions. The first one, what concessions would Russia do to have a peace treaty with Ukraine? A concession is a part of a peace process. As for talks, this is something the Anglo-Saxon banned the Kiev regime from doing. First, the US, then the UK, they made them adopt relevant laws that prohibit Kiev from having any negotiation processes whatsoever with the Russian side. So there is nothing to add here. Globally, Russia has always been and remains open to diplomatic settlement of the Ukraine crisis, considering modern realities and taking into consideration Russia's concerns for security. In order to attain a comprehensive, stable, just settlement of the crisis, its root causes must be eliminated. The West should stop sending arms to the armed forces of Ukraine. Kiev should stop hostilities. Ukraine should return to the roots of its statehood, neutral, out-of-bloc, non-nuclear status, protecting the Russian language, observing the rights and freedoms of people, of their own citizens, and protecting the Russian language too, national minorities, giving up nationalistic ideology, something we do not hear from Kiev. They only think in categories of war. They raise stakes deliberately and hatching aggressive plans against Russia. But we were reminded in 2014 Russia took significant steps to politically address this Ukrainian crisis. Needless to mention something which is clear to everyone, in 2015 Russia initiated the Minsk agreements in February 2015. Thanks to the involvement of Russia, the Minsk II set of measures was developed and signed and later adopted by the UN Security Council resolution. It was a significant concession from the Donbass that was hoping for a non-military solution to the conflict. However, Ukraine, with the support of the West, because Germany and France were guarantor countries. They were guarantors of Minsk agreements, for one. Ukraine sabotaged the Minsk agreements, and Kiev, Berlin, and Paris admitted that these agreements were only needed to buy time to build up military capacities of the armed forces of Ukraine. I repeat, Russia is ready to consider serious proposals building on actual situation and building on the concerns of Russia regarding security. We will never accept the language of blackmailing or ultimatums. Thank you. Our second question, is the Russian economy ready for an exacerbation of the conflict, should it happen, and for further strengthening of sanctions? You know, recently it has been dawning on many Western experts that anti-Russian sanctions are counterproductive, having no future. At the same time, they mention realities, they mention the actual situation in their own economies. Our counterparts, 2 years after sanction exercises, realize that sanctions, something they call sanctions, is a pointless attempt to deal damage to Russia. They, however, deal huge damage to themselves, to their own economic enterprises, to their own development. As for our country, it is obvious that we have overcome all external challenges. We're actively building a strong framework for fulfilling strategic plans to develop Russian economy and social areas, as has been mentioned by the Russian president this February when he addressed the Federal Assembly. We are the 5th economy in the world and the 1st in Europe. We seek to become the 4th economy worldwide by 2030. Regardless of the restrictions, our GDP growth rates over the last year were 3.6% according to the Russian statistic agency in the IMF. This January, the prediction of the GDP in 2024 was 2.6%, and now the IMF reached this forecast to 3.2%. In comparison to the GDP of the European Union, which, according to IMF, should not exceed 1.1%. We consistently and in a targeted manner strengthen our integration ties with friendly countries on bilateral and also within the EU, the CIS, BRICS, and the SCO. We pursue the policy for de-dollarization of foreign economic activities, creating independent payment mechanisms while fulfilling import substitution program, and these are the outcomes of the restrictions imposed on Russia, and these have every ground to believe that we can overcome every such sanction imposed on us. News.ru, are you with us? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. My name is Mikhail. We have 3 questions. Firstly, the authorities in Yerevan commented on the previous use of the language unlawful invasion of Russia to Ukraine. This has recently been commented by the MFA of Russia. The Speaker of the Parliament of Armenia, Alen Simonyan, said the unlawful word was used in order to not offend European partners. He also reminded that Belarus and Turkey do not recognize new territories in Russia, and he asked a question in response: can they only deal with us? How can you comment on this new statement by the leadership of Armenia? I don't know about capacities, and I just hope that those who make such statements will find strength enough to respond to Russian parliamentaries. Dated 24th of April, we will scrutinize the answer from Armenian counterparts, and we will comment on this in public should it be necessary. Secondly, on the initiative of local authorities, Niger's capital, Niamey, raised Russian flags to symbolize friendship with Moscow. At the same time, Western media outlets, specifically The Hill, said that the United States are conceding to Russian geopolitical struggle for Africa. Does the press of the United States exceed the issue in order to sensitize this DOS to the issue? Note their aggressive narratives, struggle for Africa, as they put it. We cooperate with Africa, we pursue cooperation, we provide assistance on their request. We're looking forward for opportunities for mutually beneficial interaction. We build coherence, we develop history, we outline future prospects. We are not fighting, we do not use aggressive rhetoric. Wordings will give you additional facts to justify my point. While reviewing your question in greater detail, why do analysts conclude that the West loses in the African continent? Reason being, they are not working on their mistakes. They're taking decisions which have been killing their reputation on the continent. Instead of correcting these mistakes, they replay that same role as neo-colonialists, using transnational companies through enslaving, through media, through implicit influence, through not promoting equitable cooperation, through various degrading PR campaigns, giving false promises about equality, while at the same time unwilling to sign documents of UN General Assembly, for one, that seek to prevent new forms of racism, xenophobia, and other related things. Maybe it is the reason they believe they are losing. But again, it's not about game, it's not about struggle or wrestling. It is about interaction, about peace, about true equality rather than false equality. Yet another question. On the 25th of April, Bloomberg said that G7 leaders' advisors intended to have in Doha on the 27th to 28th of April a Copenhagen format meeting with representatives of the global South states to discuss preparations for the conference on Ukrainian crisis in Switzerland. What do you know about the outcomes of this meeting? How can you comment on this? I suggest that you be very careful whenever you quote this source of mass misinformation, because it proved to be such. Now, with reference to actual facts, this meeting did take place. It was held behind closed doors. It seems they have something to conceal, considering that they have no publication. Things are not going too well for them. The countries of the global South and the East, in spite of the pressure of the West, are not yielding to persuasions. They refuse to support the Zelensky formula and come up with a collective ultimatum against Russia on the insistence of the West. They still question the reasons for such Copenhagen format meetings without Russia's participation. Switzerland wanted to save this whole thing. They suggested that they move away from the Copenhagen format, from the Zelensky formula, and to galvanize a new process, starting with a discussion of through allegedly neutral topics, which are nuclear security, food, and sea navigation, as well as humanitarian issues such as exchange of prisoners and return of children. There is unfortunately nothing new in the initiatives of the Swiss. It is yet another trick, something Kiev has already previously suggested when they tried to convince the Global South countries join in at least one of the 10 points of the Zelensky formula in order to interpret this as a consent to all the provisions of that same formula. There have been also efforts and it is been going in spite of the unconstructive approach of Kiev. The IAEA considers the nuclear security issue regarding the Zaporozhye NPP. There are permanent observers there of the agency, but Kiev continuously posing daily threats to the NPP. There have been specific aspects to ensure food security and sea navigation in the Black Sea with participants of Turkey, but Ukraine refused to adopt on the agreements that were in sight.
Oh, we're talking about the questions of exchange of people being held in captivity and the return of children to their homelands. But no added value will come out of the discussion of these themes in Switzerland. This Swiss conference is just the consequence of the bankrupt Copenhagen process, which took way which is familiar to all of us. You know, but all of those formats, just as Zelensky formula, do not reflect of the real state of affairs. We only end up to the prolonging of the military activities, and you know what, without the participation of Russia and without taking its interests into account, no kind of settlement can be conducted. And as for choosing Switzerland as a host for this conference, you know that we have stopped to be some kind of a neutral platform. Because Bern has lost its function as a neutral mediator and has taken the side of the Kiev regime. It also has imposed sanctions on Russia. It joins all the pro-Ukrainian resolutions, international organizations, and that's why it has done nothing to restore its neutrality, which has been lost. It could have added some burning issues to the agenda, such as the stopping of shipment of arms to the armed forces of Ukraine, the confirmation of a neutral status of Ukraine, the destructive role of the expanding of NATO, the legitimate nature of the sanctions, the neo-Nazi nature of the Kiev regime, and the fact that the Kiev regime keeps violating human rights and the rights of national minorities. However, the pseudo-mediators of Switzerland do not think to include such issues on their agenda. We call on our partners of the world majority to not let themselves be pushed into another anti-Russian or opportunistic move of the West. Thank you so much, Ms. Zakharova. Thank you. Is Reuters here with us? Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. You have you have answered our question in detail when talking about David Cameron. I think I have something to add on that, but I will try to keep it to myself. No. Please do. Please add more details to your questions. Okay. The question will come as the following: if some kind of a strike is being carried out, what will be the reaction of Russia? You know, this question should be addressed to those agencies of Russia which are responsible for the defense field of our country, and there is no doubt that we will respond. But the question is how crazy one has to be if to think that you are at the head of a civilized state and can make such statements at the same time. One have to suffer from severe amnesia if we remember what we're talking about, nuclear states. How irresponsible one has to be. I'm not even talking about him being a politician. I think what is characteristic of many Western politicians, but how harsh a man one has to be not to think about the consequences of such statements, because we know what some retaliation measures will follow. You know what, we always respond to such statements. Probably someone does not have to think about the interests of the own citizens, of the citizens of the countries of the collective West. We should think about the interests, but we do not do that. But on the other hand, we're talking about David Cameron, and what was the last time he thought when he decided to exit the European Union? No one can even fathom what the consequences are today, and why he is still popular is a question which should be addressed to the people of Great Britain, and I do not have to be involved with that. Thank you so much, and we also have 3 more questions, and we would like to get your comment on that. We would like to get your comment on the statements and actions made by the United States in regard to Russia in the very recent days. My first question is dedicated to sanctions which were introduced by the United States against hundreds of companies from China, United Arab Emirates, Turkey. We were charged with helping Russia getting access to new technologies and the production of double designation, and these were the most large-scale sanctions which have been imposed to China as of yet. How could you comment on these actions? You know, this is just a trade war. It's a trade war which goes beyond the market. It's only aimed at maintaining the own role in the market. And as we do not have enough resources, we have to resort to such measures. And the retaining of China is another issue on the agenda, because the rapid growth of Chinese economy irritates America to a grand extent. We want to maintain the economic leadership without having any lawful opportunity to do so. Thank you so much. And the second question is, on the very same day, the State Department of the U.S. have accused Russia of using chemical weapons against the armed forces of Ukraine in violation of the international conventions. We were talking about chloropicrin. And so in the words of the State Department of the U.S., that's what Russians used against Ukrainian. Are you going to comment on this? Yes, because I think what the very cynical thing about this is that the American curators of the Kiev regime just allowed themselves such insinuations on the anniversary of the tragedy of the 2nd May, which I talked about at the very beginning of a briefing, because the Ukrainian neo-Nazis used chloropicrin back then in violation of CWC, which led to the death of more than 50 protesters. And it's on the eve of this anniversary that they make such statements. And there's a speculation of violation of Russia of the CWE is contrary to the real state of affairs on the of a special military operation. Washington have thought up no better than to use those insinuations which have already been to practice in Syria. We have already made these insinuations against regarding the use of chemical weapons by Russia, and today this empty-worded accusations of usage of Russian armed forces of toxic chemicals and chemical weapons to fight against unrest is what is being done by Washington just to shift the blame and shift the focus from the numerous crimes being committed by the Kiev regime. And let me remind you that on February 27th, the Federal Security Forces of Russia have publicized information about the detention of 3 agents of Ukrainian special services who were planning to conduct a terrorist attack in the Zaporozhye Oblast with a chemical weapon BZ. Let me remind you that it belongs to the United States. We had ampoules of this very chemical weapon with them. There are also other materials which can be used as evidence of Zelensky's role in that. The Ministry of Defense of Russia, as well as the MFA of Russia, regularly public information on the Ukraine's violation of the CWC and the use of toxic chemicals against Russian soldiers and civilians, and the plans to organize the relevant provocations in regard to the chemical factories of Donbass and other new federal entities of Russian Federation. Unfortunately, some of them have already been put into practice. Thank you so much. And my last question has to do with Syria, because on the very first day, the organization Hand in Hand for Aid and Development referred to the United Nations Human Rights Committee, complaining about Russia. They have accused the Russian troops on conducting strikes, airstrikes on the certain center, Kafr Nabul, in the Syrian Idlib on the 5th of May of 2019, which resulted in deaths of 2 people. My question is, you have never quoted Russian NGOs which operate in Syria and in the direction of Syria. Unfortunately, Reuters does not quote them often either. You know, I have not seen these messages. This does not speak anything to me. We, in the United Nations Human Rights Committee, I have not noticed this organizations talking, and it looks like you were just promoting this kind of organization by such questions. I'd like to think that this is not what you're doing here, but still I will look into this, and if there will be something to comment on, I will comment on that. But I would suggest that you just pay more attention to other human rights organizations and NGOs. I think you should just expand what you look into. Thank you. And this is the Moscow Post here. Yes, I will look into this, but I don't know what your European Bureau, what kind of information European Bureau looks into. Okay, so you made me smile, and now let's continue with the Moscow Post. Yes, good afternoon. We have 2 questions today. Could you comment on the plans of the Estonian authorities to refer to European Union and NATO of the alleged signals of navigation satellite GPS system being violated by Russia? You know, the Russian MFA is not going to comment on that. You can refer to other relevant agencies, but this has nothing to do with MFA. And my second question is, the heads of MFAs of Russia and Tajikistan have decided on admission of citizens to Russia, and we have published different interpretations of these discussions. Russian MFAs said we have given wide explanations to the partners on the measures being undertaken by the Russian special services in preventing terrorism, and Tajikistan said that there is a negative understanding of what the citizens are doing and the violation of their rights and freedoms. What do these differences come from? Could you please comment? You know, there is a high level of cooperation of Russia and Tajikistan in fighting against terrorism, and we have very similar positions on burning issues of international fight against terrorism, as well as against common challenges and threats which keep coming up. We also share opinions on the situation of terrorism in Afghanistan and the harm we could bring. As for our cooperation, the cooperation will level our special services as the consequence of a horrible terrorist attack in Crocus City Hall is yet another example of a level of a convergence of our attitudes, because our joint work helped us identify those who are to blame for this tragedy, and we do feel the support of people of this country, the support they express towards our citizens, towards our country. We know what they feel. This is their tragedy as well, and we know it with sunset, and this is a part of our shared history now. I would like to highlight once again that during a telephone call between the ministers of foreign affairs of our country on April the 13th, the Tajikistani side received detailed explanations on the measures of prevention of terrorism under the Russian legislation and the terrorist attack in the Krakow City Hall and its horrible consequences. They are the main reason why we started carefully inspecting those foreign citizens which come to our country. I would like to highlight what these measures are not being aimed at people coming from some certain country or people of some certain nationality. And both countries have expressed have talked in favor of a careful treatment of our strategic partnership. I have also received several questions which we're going to address later on, and I would like to congratulate all the Christians and all Orthodox Christians with the upcoming Easter. We are going to publish information on that. We wish you a light holiday, and because there is just a line of important holidays here in Russia, so I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.